This is Devin. I just want to thank all the new listeners. We got a huge influx after our search engine collab and word of mouth over the last couple of weeks. So welcome. Make sure you're actually following us. So hit the follow button wherever you're listening so that you can get notifications for new episodes. They drop on Tuesdays. And please give us a 5-star rating. It really, truly is just me, Manny, and Noah working on this. So every post, every TikTok cut, every interview, every email is being sent from us. We don't have a studio backing us. So any bit of support really, really makes a huge difference to us. All right, let's get into this week's episode.
I'm Manny.
I'm Noah.
This is Devin, and this is No Such Thing, the show where we settle our dumb arguments and yours by actually doing the research. On today's episode, why are headlights so motherfucking bright? And can Biden's infrastructure bill actually be the thing that saves us?
There's no such thing. No such thing. No such thing. No such thing. No such thing.
So the other day, it's about 7 o'clock at night. I was out on Long Island visiting the family, and I was driving back to Brooklyn. And this time of year gets dark pretty early, which is fine for most of the driving until I live by this expressway we call the Jackie Robinson. It is notoriously a difficult road to drive on.
Why?
The lanes are more narrow, and it's really windy. So, and there's a lot of, okay, you got to go from your far right to your far left to your far right because the exit's over here, and then you need the exit on the right. So, especially for someone who's inexperienced, it is a difficult expressway to be driving through. But what makes it even harder nowadays, especially at night, is that everybody has the fucking brightest lights you have ever seen in your entire life. So you got people behind you whose lights are so bright they're reflecting off your rear view mirror and going in your eyes. You got people to the right of you, their lights are so bright it's shining in the mirror in your eyes. And then you got people on the opposite side of the expressway coming towards you, and it looks like everyone just has their high beams on. It's also a road where you just gotta go, or like you'll get in an accident if you go too slow. Basically,
Yeah.
Like, you just gotta drive fast, even if you don't feel comfortable driving fast. There's so many times where especially this time, I'm driving on it. I'm like, I can only see the car in front of me. My visibility is about 10 feet.
Yeah.
I don't know where the road is going outside of that. Luckily enough, I've done this drive enough times that I sort of know the direction it's going to go. But in my mind, I'm like, this feels so unsafe. And I'm like, is this something? I know I'm getting a little bit older. I turned 32 in the last year. I'm like, is my eyesight just so bad? Or is this just like a thing that everybody's lights are just way too bright nowadays? It's making it really hard to see.
No, I've had so many similar experiences. There are a lot of roads in Ohio that don't have street lights. You're only relying on your headlights.
It's like when you're driving upstate.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not just unique to Ohio, I suppose. But I also have astigmatism, which is very common. You have it as well. Noah's been blessed with great genetics, I think.
I have bad eyesight, but not that way.
And, at nighttime when I'm driving, so often I can't fucking see. And I feel a little crazy. I don't know if this is true, but it feels like it's gotten worse over the past like 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
I've been driving since age 17.
Yep.
And I don't remember it being this bad.
I don't either. And that's why I'm like, is my eyesight getting worse or the lights getting brighter?
Yeah.
Right? Because I used to remember my parents complaining about driving at night, right? Like, driving at night is so hard. And I used to be like, what are you talking about? Like, yeah, it's a little bit darker.
Yeah, it's dark. It's harder than during the day, but it's fine.
It's fine. You can see.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like driving at, like, I only drive at night when I absolutely have to.
Yeah. My mom says she won't drive at night anymore at all.
I respect it.
Yeah.
Because like when I'm driving at night, it is just sort of like, hopefully I don't crash.
Yeah. Fully putting your life at risk.
Yeah, it's like I cannot see.
Yeah, and it's not just people with their high beams on.
No.
You know, where it's like that's a whole other issue.
Exactly.
That's
People do
bad, but
that.
it's like, all right, those are people being inconsiderate.
Yes.
Yeah.
A whole other issue. This is just regular lights. are the issue.
regular headlights now. It seems like everyone's headlights now are like those really bright lights you would see when we first started driving on like those pickup trucks. That you'd be like, what type of light
like,
system
who
is
is
this?
Yeah.
Like for like off-roading that they would be using on like
Yeah.
like a normal street. It's like, this is too much. Now it feels
yeah.
like everyone
Everyone
like
has
a
it.
That's
Camry
default.
has those lights now.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I'm like, you know, when I'm driving my mom's car, it's kind of new. It's a few years old. Am I contributing to this? I don't even know how her
Well,
headlights are.
that's the funny thing, right? Because I like to say, what are all of y'all doing?
Yeah.
But I never.
Everyone else is
until
looking
this
at you.
moment. I did
Yeah.
not think, am I doing
Yeah.
this?
It could be the case that no one thinks it's them,
Yeah, of course.
but
Or it's like, it's great. Like, wow, these lights look fantastic for me. Like, I can see the roads.
I love being able to see so well.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, am I blinding everybody?
Yeah.
But I wonder, it's like, I guess it's great when you're driving when there are no other cars.
Right, yeah.
Because
that's the benefit.
That is true. Like I have experienced that on like when you're driving a newer car versus an older car on like, streets like Ohio or upstate, somewhere where there's no street lights.
you hit the high beams and it's just daytime now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like I can see the entire road. But then you don't think about, what are the other people who are seeing
Yeah.
me coming at them see? Especially like we're saying, we're not even talking about high beams. We're just talking about regular highway driving.
Yeah. We've all accepted the fact that we're just temporarily blinding each other when we pass
Yes.
each other on the roads. And that feels bad.
That's the thing.
that
It's like
shouldn't be
it's
the case.
everyone like I have no idea where I'm going, and I'm just following the person in front of me, and hopefully I don't crash. And like we are all just like, I'm like, at first I was like, oh, it's just me being anxious.
Yeah.
Like it's chill out. Like everyone else obviously can see they're driving.
Yeah. Not hundreds of accidents around me.
I don't know. I feel like a conspiracy theorist. Like,
Yep.
what is this concerted effort to do brighter lights? Why? And then, I'm also wondering what like the danger levels are, like the risk. Have people been hurt by this?
Yeah, and I'm curious to know if this is a U.S. issue or worldwide.
Yeah.
Like, are we the only ones suffering through this? Mm-hmm. Or in Europe and Asia, what's it like over there? Because we're driving, Japanese cars. what have you.
exactly.
But are they making them different for us versus over there?
Right.
So,
Is this legal?
yeah.
That's my question.
How is this legal?
How is this legal? Is this legal? Or are people like, are we like, is the brightness of the lights just stock at this point?
Right.
Or is it like I'm not a car guy at all. So is everyone just changing their headlights and making them super bright and I'm just not aware?
Like getting the upgrade for certain extra brightness.
Yeah, like I'm gonna go buy
Deluxe,
some lights off
yeah.
Amazon and take it to the shop. Like, are people doing that? Or is this just like
Yeah.
out the box? This is what the cars are coming with now.
No such thing. No
After the break, we talked to someone who's been obsessed with car lighting ever since he was 7 years old.
such thing.
Okay, we're back.
I'm Manny.
I'm Noah.
Devin. So we're trying to figure out why the hell headlights seem to be so bright and why is there so much glare when we're driving on the roads at night. So I spoke with one of the industry's leading car lighting experts.
Okay.
So can I have you just start by introducing yourself?
I'm Daniel Stern. I am the chief editor of Driving Vision News, which is the global vehicle lighting world's technical and trade journal of record.
He first realized his fascination with headlights when he was 7 years old.
And my father was driving me somewhere after dark. I think it was maybe like a musical presentation when I was in first or second grade. And he showed me how there was a low beam for when there were other cars around and a high beam for when the road was clear, when it was empty. So that was the root of it. And then many years later, I went off to school in dark, rainy Oregon at the University of Oregon. And it seemed to me that I really could not see as well as I thought I should be able to when I was driving after dark. And so I started sort of poking around into how headlamps work and, maybe how they don't work. Around that time, I made my first trip to Europe, and I saw that they did a whole lot of things differently with car lighting. And so the interest took hold, and I transferred to the University of Michigan, where at that time, the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute had a terrific library full of decades worth of research, not only about lighting, but lighting was a lot of what they did. And so I would spend hours in this library just systematically devouring these decades worth of research, and then I'd take the elevator up to the second or third floor and ask questions of the researchers who were working up there. They were very patient with me, and so that was sort of my 3-year-long independent study on vehicle lighting right at one of the world's foremost research institutes for it.
To be honest, I thought the solution here would be pretty simple, just like turn down the LED lights and then you'll get rid of glare. But after talking to Daniel over the last couple of weeks, it turns out this issue is way more complicated than any of us anticipated. And to understand why it's so complicated, you have to know some of the recent advancements we've made with car lighting technology.
Starting in 1940, all vehicles in the United States had what are called sealed beam headlamps. They're
For our purposes, we'll fast forward to the 90s.
In the mid-90s, high-intensity discharge headlamps came along. Now you could have 3 times more light within the headlight beam. And the light color was, it had a radical shift from sort of a warm white to a cold white, a bluish white. And there was a spike in glare complaints when that happened. And the official response was, yeah, you'll get used to it. You're only noticing it because they look different. Just look away from the glare. And then in the early to mid 2000s, LEDs advanced to the point where we could use them for headlamps. And so headlamps once again grew brighter and bluer, and the glare complaints spiked, and the same response sort of came down. Yeah, you'll get used to it. It's not really hurting anything. It's just look away from the glare.
And today, are most headlamps LED?
Yeah. And new cars are pretty much all designed, new cars, trucks, SUVs, new road-going vehicles are pretty much all designed with LED headlamps right from the start.
All right, so for our question, why is headlight glare so bad? The first culprit, LEDs. So the first question I had for him is, are LED lights just brighter, right? Is that the issue? The lights are just brighter? So this may be, a dumb and obvious question, but are LED headlamps technically brighter?
Well, it's a little difficult to answer that question as asked, because this isn't really when you say brighter, and you think of it in terms like you're in your dining room and you turn the dimmer up or down to make the dining table brighter or dimmer. This is a lot more complex than that. A headlight beam isn't just a floodlight or a spotlight that is brighter or dimmer. It's actually a very complex pattern of light with areas defined by what are called test points. And a test point might have a minimum required intensity, a maximum required intensity, or both. And a low beam in particular is super complex because you need to have high intensity for the driver to see far enough down the road, right next to low intensity to protect other drivers on the road from glare.
So I'm actually going to share this video with you guys. That'll sort of exemplify what he's saying here.
Great, because that didn't make any sense to me.
When it's shining on the wall. So a little bit before. Just pause it on there. Okay, let me try breaking this down because I know this is kind of hard to visualize, especially for a podcast. But imagine you're shining your headlights in a garage on a wall. You're probably thinking of something similar to a flashlight, right? Like pretty even light, maybe a little bit more oval or rectangular because these are headlamps versus a flashlight, but that's not really the case. So what do they actually look like? All right, so let's imagine for a second, and stick with me, that you're some abstract artist and you're painting Luigi Mangioni's latest mugshot. Because you're an abstract artist, you're not just going to draw straight lines and fill in the eyebrows completely. Instead, you're going to put maybe a blob of paint here, maybe no paint on this area of the eyebrow, maybe a little bit of paint down below. And that's how the headlight beam operates as well. There are parts in the beam that have really intense light, and there are parts within the beam that have almost no light at all. And this varying degree of light intensity is really purposeful. the headlight is designed so that the person driving has maximum visibility, but limiting the amount of light that's being thrown to other people from oncoming traffic.
Okay. So the gradient is like you're on one side of the highway driving north, the other side of the highway is driving south. Mm-hmm. And the gradient is blocking people who are going south from like being blinded by your light.
Exactly.
Yeah, because if it was all that intensity, it would be really impossible to see.
So it's really very complex. That said, yes, in a word, yes, today's headlamps are higher intensity. They put a lot more light out. They put out much wider beams.
For our purposes, we'll say they're brighter. Although technically, I don't want Daniel to yell at me.
Yeah,
it's not so simple. Of course,
they're more intense. Is that a good word?
Yes, yeah. We'll say intense. I don't know if he'll be okay with that. And then there's another reason why they appear so bright. You talk about how with LED lights, it's more intensity from a smaller. I don't know with the technical term for it, but like a smaller opening, right? It's coming from a smaller space.
Yeah, the technical term is luminance. And in real simple words, it means how bright something looks. You can also think of it as light density. If you have a certain amount of light coming from a small area, it's going to look brighter than that very same amount of light coming from a large area. Because that given amount of light with a large area, it's spread over a big surface. Whereas with a small area, it's sort of condensed into a point instead of a large surface. You can think of it as say you're putting a certain amount of water through a hose. If you have a tiny little hole at the end of the nozzle, you're going to have a jet stream. You can power wash your driveway. If you have a big sort of a big watering, looks like the end of a watering can, sprinkling end of a watering can, well, you'll have a nice sort of gentle rain shower. Same amount of water, but it's behaving very differently, and light does the same thing.
That's a really good visual way of thinking about it. All right, so that's the second reason why LEDs appear brighter is because the light is coming from a smaller opening. Sure. And then the last culprit is the color blue.
This is really interesting, actually. There's a lot of really sturdy science showing that for any given intensity, white light that contains more blue creates much greater discomfort glare than light that has less blue. So with that on the table, it's been found that, just to put rough numbers on it, if you have two headlamps that measure, say, 1,000 candela, the candela being the measurement unit for intensity, two headlamps putting 1,000 candela towards an oncoming driver's eyes. One of the headlamps is a halogen lamp, and it has sort of a yellowish white, warm white light color. Mm-hmm. The other headlamp is an LED. It has a cold white, a bluish white light color. In order for those two headlamps to feel the same to the oncoming driver in terms of how they experience the glare, the halogen headlamp would have to be producing at least 1,600 candela to match the feeling of glare created by the LED headlamp. And the kicker of that is the sort of the punchline, maybe it's a punch in the gut or a punch in the eyes, is that you don't get 60% better seeing with the bluer light. You don't get any better seeing with the bluer light. You just get, you do have a sort of a feeling as though it's brighter, and you have this much greater sensation of glare caused by the bluer light.
This was really crazy to me, right? Because our eyes are more sensitive to blue light, so it appears brighter to us, but it actually doesn't help us see any better. And then it just causes more glare when we're on the road.
So then why do we have them?
Because it looks cool.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
So let's recap for LEDs.
Yes.
They're more powerful than previous headlamps. Mm-hmm. They appear to be brighter because they're coming from smaller openings. And then we got blue, which creates more glare. And it also brings us to our second culprit, which is called headlight aim. You know what that is?
No.
You don't want to be?
Headlight aim.
Headlight aim.
I can guess if you want.
And yeah, guess.
I've noticed some headlights have like lids on them.
No. Okay.
All right.
Is it like the direct spot where it's most intense?
Closer.
I mean,
Closer.
All right.
Yeah. So You guys didn't do the research.
What I looked like a car lighting specialist.
All right. So we talked about blue. We talked about how people like the look of the blue lights, right? A lot of people with older cars will go out and buy LED light bulbs and put them in their older cars.
I remember that with like James Bond movies. They made it a point for blue lights in the head.
Blue lights, right? Yeah. So Daniel said there's a very big problem with this, which is the LED lights are not designed to go in these older cars.
You can go on Amazon, eBay, you can walk into parts stores all over the place. You can buy these LED bulbs claiming to update your halogen headlamps. In the United States, the major brands market them with a nudge and a wink saying, these are only for fog lamps. Don't put them in your headlamps. Right? Because fog light bulbs are not regulated in the United States where headlight bulbs are. Of course, fog lamps and headlamps use a lot of the same types of bulbs. And people put them in their headlamps and they think, oh, hey, well, now I've got LED headlamps and look how bright they are. It's a different kind of light. So it's very much like putting on somebody else's eyeglasses. Mm-hmm. You might find someone else's eyeglasses that look terrific on your face, but because the lenses are not for your eyes, you're not going to see properly and you're going to give yourself a headache and you're going to injure your eyes doing it. So in the same way, you put LED bulbs in a halogen headlamp, you might think they look terrific and they have that blue-white appearance just like the newer cars, and you might even think you can see better. But in fact, the light distribution is all screwed up. You've got way too much light in places where that's dangerous. You've got not enough light in places where that's dangerous. And most of all, you've got a whole lot more glare. So it's very poorly policed in most of North America. So, with these things widely available and nobody's giving tickets, well, yeah, that's a major source of glare on the road.
Back on this alignment bit, right? So people are getting bulbs that aren't meant for their cars. Is there also just an issue with alignment, period, with people who have LED headlamps initially?
Very much so. And it's not just with people who have legitimate LED headlamps. Headlamp aim is, by a giant margin, the primary main determinant, not only of how well the driver can see, but how much glare they're throwing around. And headlamps, as they have evolved over the last 5-6 decades, as they've grown more and more intense, they've grown more and more sensitive to misaim.
This could be from something small, like say you have a lot of people in your car. So, the car shifts a little bit. So now the lights aren't exactly where they're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. It could be from when you're driving, if you hit a bump. If the road is angled a little bit, or it could be something that, over time your headlights shift.
In the past, a headlamp of the 1960s or 70s, maybe 80s, if it was aimed, a degree or two this way or that, it didn't really exert a huge change in the amount of light that the driver had to see on the road or the amount of glare they were throwing around. Might look a little brighter as it passes you, but it's still a low beam headlamp. But a modern headlight beam, which is very wide and has a sharp cutoff at the top of the low beam, where below this cutoff line is very high intensity and above the cutoff line is low intensity, it's dark. Low beams have such high intensity below that cutoff that a low beam aimed a degree or two too high could easily qualify as a high beam.
But that explains why we were saying when the first time we talked, right, where it felt like, why are people driving around with their high beams on?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, no, they're not. Their alignment is just off. And the low beam now is, so much more advanced than it was in the past that it feels like people have their high beams on when they're driving at you.
Wow. This is nuts.
Yeah, it's huge.
Because I had no faith in humanity, really.
I thought everyone was just driving around with their
I thought people were just like, their eyesight was getting worse or something, and they're just ripping the lights on. Like every time.
That's what it felt like.
Yeah.
Feels like.
Headlight aim is not part of the inspection process. So when you go get your car inspected, headlight aim is not something that they're checking.
Yeah, the aim is super important, and unfortunately, it is almost impossible. In North America, we just don't pay attention to headlight aim. It's almost impossible anywhere in North America, even if you're standing there with a fistful of cash and saying, somebody take my money and aim my headlamps correctly, it's really hard to get it done.
People at a auto shop aren't trained for that.
No, it's a
Even
really
if it's by request. Or
exactly. At least in the U.S.
And in some states, you don't get your car inspected at all, like the great state of Ohio.
That's why people get their cars registered in Ohio, right? Like shitty cars.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Okay, so to recap, because LED headlamps have such a small margin of error, before they create a ton of glare, alignment is super important. But in the US, it's just not something we traditionally care about. And then lastly, so our last reason on why is glare more intense now than it seems like it used to be, part of it is us.
As we get older, and this is really unfortunate. This really sucks. As we get older, we need a lot more light to see any given thing, and at the same time, we get a whole lot more sensitive to glare. So when we're 60, we need about triple the light that we needed when we were 20 to see any given thing under any given conditions at night. And we are massively more sensitive to glare.
No.
So, if only one of those two things were true, it would be really easy to fix. But both of them are true. And so if you address the one thing, you aggravate the other.
So we're more sensitive to light
Yes.
and need more
You
of
need
it.
it more.
Yes.
Wow. It's not a good place to be.
It is not a good place
not good
to
at
be.
all.
This dichotomy sort of speaks to the really, really tough situation that the United States federal government finds itself in right now. They have to balance
Yeah.
people seeing with also thinking about glare, which makes it harder for people to see. So I was curious, like, is somebody working on this?
Yeah.
Someone in the Trump
Yeah, that was my
administration,
question.
like, gonna create a rule that your headlights can be only but so bright because, there's so much glare and it's causing a huge issue. And he said that something like glare is both hard to define and then also hard to make rules for.
The fact is, this is not a symmetrical safety situation. Yes, glare can be unsafe. Absolutely, no debate about that. And it sure can be uncomfortable, but it's not a one-to-one thing. Unfortunately, up to a fairly large degree, more light from the headlights means better safety, means less likelihood of a crash. So let me sort of address how this knot is tied. I think unfortunately for a long time, particularly in North America, there's been a tendency for the official response to glare complaints to be, you'll get used to it or you won't, but just look away from it, just deal with it, grit your teeth. It's not actually a safety thing. We think glare is bad on principle, we're going to regulate it. Can't do that in North America. You have to say, well, here is concrete proof of the costs of glare in terms of the crashes that it actually causes, and so we can regulate to the degree necessary to countervail those costs and that damage. It's essentially impossible, and so that's why we have so much less regulation of headlight glare in North America than they have in Europe and in Asia and in Australia and in other countries that use a different regulatory system.
So you're saying the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, so they have not addressed this glare because there's not a lot of concrete sort of numbers that we have that glare caused X amount of accidents, therefore we need to address it by doing this.
That's exactly right. But it gets a lot more interesting than that. Because for most of the 20th century, from the dawn of electric headlights on cars, Europe had much more stringent glare control than the United States did.
Can Europe actually save us? We'll find out after the break. In Europe, they have much more stringent glare controls.
Okay.
So here's 3 things that Europe does that we do not do. Number 1, so their headlight aim is much lower than ours.
You're in your Honda Civic, You're in your Chevrolet Corvette. You're in a car. Well, behind you is a pickup truck or an SUV. And its headlamps are they're way up in the air, and they're right even with your car's mirrors. Yeah, you're going to get blasted. The rest of world regulations do two things to address that. You can't completely cure it, because this is just physics.
Yeah. Some cars are taller than others.
Some cars are taller than others. The regulations in the rest of the world do two things to limit that. They have a lower maximum headlamp mounting height. And they say if you have a headlamp that is mounted higher, it must be aimed lower. Whereas in the American regulation, the maximum mounting height is higher, which automakers like because, big, tough trucks and SUVs. And any given headlamp gets aimed the same, whether it's way up high on a Ford Excursion or way down low on, on a Corvette.
Number 2. So inspections in Europe, they have headlight aim as part of that process. We talked about in the US, we don't do that.
They have periodic vehicle inspections that include headlamp aim checking and adjustment. The cars with high output headlamps have leveling systems to compensate at least for vehicle loading, and the fancier systems compensate for irregularities in the road.
And then number 3, they have this magical system called ADB. ADB. What is ADB, you may be asking?
I am. I am, actually.
A dirty bastard?
ADB, Adaptive Driving Beam, has been around it's getting on for 2 decades now.
Okay.
In Europe, a good ADB system can give the driver 30 meters, about 100 feet greater seeing distance without more glare than a low beam, which is a huge accomplishment. I mean, that's the problem has always been that low beams don't give long enough seeing distance for the speeds that people actually drive, so we overdrive our low beams and we hit things, while high beams produce way too much glare for use in traffic. And so ADB, Adaptive Driving Beam, neatly resolves that problem to a great degree. And for those who don't know, what ADB does is it takes that high beam pattern and it puts dark spots and slices in it, following the locations of other road users' eyes.
Gotcha.
Okay,
so if there's an oncoming car, it'll try to limit the amount of light that's going into that oncoming driver's eyes.
That's exactly right.
Listen to the lengths that Europeans go through to just have basic care about each other. It's so crazy.
This kind of blew my mind when I found out this was a thing that existed, especially because we talk so much about glare. Obviously, he said there's some limitations to it.
Yeah.
If you get in a city and there's just cars everywhere.
Yeah, there's only so much it can do, and there's
then it just results back to the low beam. But I was like, oh, this is really interesting because it's a combination, but it also reduces glare. It seems like best case scenario, right?
Yeah.
It's like you get as much visibility as possible, but you're also not obstructing other people driving. It used to be just in high-end cars, but now it's in, their version of a Camry, essentially.
Oh, okay.
So it's in all the cars. We do not have this technology in the U.S.
So this isn't. It's not like a regulation, is it? Like, do they need to have it?
It's optional.
Yeah,
but because it's so,
but
cheap,
it's common. Yeah. I mean, why not?
So if you're, for example, Toyota, and you're making the same fucking car, but one of them is going to Europe and one's going to the U.S., they're actively keeping ADB in the European one and not in the American one?
So I looked into it, and this is true. We have cars in the U.S. that have ADB functionality, but it's been disabled. As people have been complaining about glare, there's been a growing movement in the U.S. to get ADB.
The ADB movement.
Or version of ADB in the U.S.
The U.S. devises and promulgates its own regulations, which are in many cases quite different to the rest of world regulation. When it looked like ADB was going to gain traction and be a thing, NHTSA went to the Society of Automotive Engineers.
So the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, otherwise known as NHTSA, told this group, hey, translate the European ADB for U.S. regulations. and the group was able to do it in record time.
And NHTSA said, yeah, thanks, but psych, we're not going to use that. And then things got really interesting.
So here's where we get to President Biden. In his infrastructure bill, which eventually became the infrastructure law, Congress told NHTSA, hey, actually, you need to adapt this ADB system that group put together. Is this actually Joe Biden's legacy? Instead of the stubborn old man who refused to drop out when it was clear that he shouldn't be running anymore? Can he be the president who saves us from headlight glare? Turns out no. NHTSA said they're not going to use that system.
We are going to devise our own standard.
And they are saying we're not going to do it because actually we have a version that is more stringent than the version that you guys signed off on. So I was like, okay, more stringent. So yeah, maybe it's even better.
Sure.
You know?
We do a lot of things better over here.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe we're going to have a better version of ADB.
It exerts requirements that don't exist in terms of system design, construction, and testing. It in the rest of the world regulation, and so it makes for a more expensive, less performant system.
So you're saying that they're thinking that their system is better because it is more restrictive, but you're saying that what they're proposing is not going to reduce glare more than the Europe version.
It's actually going to do, it can't, because the sort of a key difference is that the rest of world system says that the shadows for other drivers on the road that the system creates shall be as dark as possible. The US specification says you may not make that shadow any less intense than a regular static low beam would be at that same point in the beam. So if the other driver or the other road user happens to be in front of your car in a location where a regular low beam would be very intense, well, they're still going to be very intense. It'll be less intense than it would be from a high beam, but it'll still be very intense because it's as though it's a full intensity low beam.
So low beam is the baseline in the US version of what they're proposing here.
That's right.
You can't do anything less than that. Whereas in the Europe system, like you said, you can get it as close to as dark as possible.
That's right.
Okay.
Maybe NHTSA looked at everything and had a good reason for deciding that the US needs a different ADB system that does not reduce glare as much and is more expensive to make.
I reached out to NHTSA for comment, but they didn't respond. Because it's going to be more expensive and it seems like not as effective, it doesn't seem like automakers are going to voluntarily adapt the system in the US anytime soon. Unless something changes. I think
we will see it. I mean, and the first US system is on the road. The Rivian has it.
Okay.
I don't know anything about the how good the performance might be of that system. I haven't driven it.
Gotcha.
So I definitely think it will be offered on premium high-end vehicles at a high cost. I don't think it's going to filter down to the popular priced vehicles.
Yeah, no one is, he doesn't have much hope for it.
Damn.
But there's another curveball.
What next?
What is this, the home run
Haven't
derby?
we suffered enough?
Yeah.
Even in places like Europe that have ADB and, think about glare a lot more than we do in the US, glare complaints are still going up.
Wow.
This is a gut punch.
This is hard to hear. So they've got all these precautions, all of these regulations,
and
all of these stipulations.
Glare complaints are still
and people still feel like we feel.
The fact that headlight glare complaints are up all over the world, even in countries with stringent glare controls, and leaving ADB aside for the moment, because it's still, most cars still just have low beam and high beam all over the world. The fact that the glare complaints are increasing both here in North America, where we don't care about controlling glare, and in Europe and Australia and Japan and all these other countries where they do, that tells me that it's probably down to aspects that are not regulated anywhere in the world, which is luminance, driven by headlight size, and color, which say the bluer.
So if you had the wave a magic wand, are those the first two things you're addressing? You're changing the color of the headlamps, and you're making a rule about luminance?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I often think about it in those very terms. How many wishes do I get with this magic wand before it burns out? I think it's a really tough call if I only get one. But if I only get one, then it really has to be I wave the magic wand and poof, all cars' headlamps are aimed correctly and kept that way no matter what.
Okay.
Now, if you start to tell me I have two or three wishes,
let's give you three. Let's give you three.
Okay, great. All right, so that was my first one. That I wave the magic wand once, poof, all vehicles have their headlamps aimed correctly, and they stay that way no matter what.
Yeah.
2 and 3, they're probably going to be a limit on luminance, which is going to mean headlamps have to get bigger again. They can no longer be this tiny little strip of light or tiny little 3 dots of light. And sort of roll back this incessant trend towards bluer light, get a warmer white light color.
So I asked him, where do we go from here? Are we just screwed? He compared it to kind of like pollution and the evolution that had, right? Like pollution was bad for a while, and then eventually people were like, this kind of sucks. We don't want to live this way.
Yeah.
And there was enough of a groundswell, and then things started to change. But he's like, you got to be careful with this stuff because it's not a simple solution. And a lot of people think glare is so easy to solve, just do X, but it's not science-backed. He said science is slow and incremental. You're not going to have change overnight, right? So, and you need to make sure the changes that you are asking for are actually backed by science, not emotion-based.
I mean, yes, glare is infuriating. It's infuriating. You can't get in the car and go to the grocery store for a carton of ice cream without getting assaulted by headlight glare. That is infuriating, and you spend time on Facebook or Reddit or wherever, and you want to vent and you want to rant, and it's easy to get on side with these charlatans, and they wind up sort of using up all the oxygen in the room and polluting the discussion space. I want to make it really clear that headlight glare is real.
Yeah.
It is a problem. It is a very complex problem because it has all these moving parts, and real lives are at stake no matter which way you go. But I am optimistic because I see political will developing. I see groups of respectable scientists really thinking about the problem in ways that they haven't before. And so, I mean, leaving aside the fact that we're at the start of at least a 4-year period where regulators and regulatory agencies are on the chopping block and scientists are likely to be muzzled. Leaving that aside for the moment, if we can sort of carve out that luxury, I am optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting just kind of honing in on why don't we just make them yellow lights instead? Like, I do wonder if that's just a kind of a taste thing that seems like the most realistic thing to actually change, like based on just habits or taste, where people might think it's cool and retro even to have like that more natural light thing. So maybe something will happen just out of that more than the safety glare issue.
Well, they're shooting the new Fast and Furious now, right? Call up Vin Diesel. Let's tell him, hey man, for these LEDs, we're gonna do some yellow light shit.
Yeah.
Get the kids thinking that yellow is cool again.
Yeah.
To your point, I think
I would love to see a scene.
You make yellow cool again.
Yeah.
Maybe that's how we change things up.
Fast 11 or 12, whatever it is.
Yeah, I don't know which one we're on.
They might be. Yeah, I think it's 11.
When they were just like, "Bro, we're gonna shoot this in LA now."
Oh yeah.
The fires. I was like,
That's how you do it.
yeah.
Oh, you can just change it.
No Such Thing is produced by Manny Fidel, Noah Friedman, and me, Devin Joseph. The theme song is by Manny. Additional music this episode provided by Certain Self. Special thanks to our guest this week, Daniel Stern. Daniel, thank you for the countless hours, texts, emails you sent back and forth to make sure we got everything right for this episode. And we're working on an episode right now about why guys don't ask follow-up questions. So if you have experiences with this, strong opinions, send us a voice memo to mannynoahdevin@gmail.com. That's DEVAN. Make sure you're spelling that correctly. We're getting a lot of people spelling DEVON. Sorry, that is incorrect. And make sure you go to No Such Thing That Show. You can subscribe to our newsletter, and we drop some extras for all the episodes in there as well. All right, see you guys next week.